All right, everyone, welcome back from lunch. I apologize, I'm running a little bit late myself. Usually on time. Well, let's jump right back into our discussion about different occult traditions. We covered a few in the first section, and I want to now move into talking about Kabbalah. The word Kabbalah in Hebrew means reception. And again, synchronistically this day, as the date 10/4, I tend to look at it being about reception, about being openness, relating to openness to truth. So Kabbalah was proper reception, the proper state of mind that one needed to be in to receive truth. It's an ancient system of Hebraic esoteric teachings, communicated to initiates through symbols and correspondences. The most well-known and significant aspect of Kabbalistic symbolism is the tree of life, this symbol on the left. It's formed by what's called sephirot, which means emanations. There are 10 of them. And these 10 sephirot or emanations are connected by 22 paths, forming this tree structure. The sephirot corresponds to various aspects of human mental and emotional characteristics. An 11th sphere named Da'at is not considered as one of the sephirot, but rather as the place from which the entire tree of life grows. And Da'at corresponds to the realm of hidden or occulted knowledge. As we'll see when I break down the tarot tradition in the last segment of the presentation, Da'at actually corresponds to the first of the three trivium steps: knowledge, understanding, and wisdom. You could see in the image that Binah corresponds to understanding and Hokmah to wisdom. These three spheres at the top of the tree of life ultimately lead to the crown, which is known as Keter in Kabbalah, and that is the highest expression of consciousness. The Kabbalistic tree has correspondences to the Vedic chakra systems, with each level of the tree corresponding to a different chakra. So the Malkuth or kingdom level of the Kabbalistic tree corresponds to the root chakra. The Yesod or foundation Sephirah corresponds to the sacrum chakra or the desire center. Hod and Netzah correspond to the solar plexus chakra, a dualistic chakra because the will center is comprised of an internal aspect, courage, and an external aspect, will. And then Tiferet in the middle of the Kabbalistic tree corresponds to the heart chakra. And then Geburah and Hesed correspond to the throat chakra. One of these spheres, Geburah, corresponds to working upon yourself and the inner voice that you have to employ to transform inwardly. Whereas Hesed or compassion, that sphere corresponds to influencing other people with your voice. Then, of course, we get up to the higher levels of the tree, which I've already talked about, corresponding to the third eye chakra, understanding and wisdom, and then the crown chakra, unity consciousness. There are three pillars or paths on this tree, corresponding to the vertical columns. The left-hand path is known as the pillar of severity and generally deals with the internal aspects of consciousness. The right-hand pillar, the pillar of mercy, generally deals with the external or masculine aspects of consciousness, and the pillar of mildness in the middle represents the synthesis between those two paths. There is a order to the sephirot, or emanations, and they're labeled as such, with the first Sephirah Keter being number 1, and then moving in a progression down through Malkuth, which is Sephirah 10. And the energy movement on the tree of life corresponds to a being that is moving upward in a state of consciousness from Malkuth, which represents base consciousness and physical world identification, up through the crown chakra. So this is the progression of energy on the tree of life. It works in a lightning bolt pattern, and often the Kabbalistic tree is referred to as the thunderstruck tree. You'll often see it depicted as a tree being struck by lightning, because this lightning path represents the path of energy from unconsciousness and worldly identification to enlightened or unity consciousness. Also in the Kabbalistic tradition, Kabbalists refer to what is known as 4 worlds of Kabbalah. And the triangles on the Kabbalistic tree correspond to these worlds. So if you look at the Kabbalistic tree as being 3 sets of 3 spheres joined by paths in triangles, you could look at Keter, Chokmah, and Binah as one of these triangles at the top of the tree. Then you could look at Hesed, Geburah, and Tiferet in the middle of the tree as the second triangle, the second triad of spheres. That represents another world. Then Hod, Netzah, and Yesod representing yet a third world, and then the base Malkuth, or kingdom, representing a fourth. So these worlds are as follows. Asiyah is the bottom world. It represents the physical plane or the material world. And it corresponds to the alchemical symbol of earth. And there's only one sphere in that world, Malkuth. Again, that's not really progressing. That's staying earthbound, earth-identified, physical world-identified, base consciousness, only dealing with the physical plane. You don't have to look at it as a negative thing. It's just the things that operate in the physical domain. The next world up is Yetzirah, and that's called the formative world or the mental plane, corresponding to air or intellect. Again, that's comprised of the 3 spheres, Yesod, Hod, and Netzah in that triangular formation. Above that, you have the creative world, the emotional plane represented by water, and that is the second triangle of Tiferet, the heart chakra corresponding to emotion, Geburah, and Hesed. Then you pass what is known as the line that represents the abyss, that is Da'at, leading to the truly higher realm, which is the realm of will or spirit, symbolized by the alchemical element of fire, and symbolized and comprised of the top triumvirate of the Kabbalistic tree, Keter, crown or unity consciousness, Chokmah, wisdom, basically because it represents right action, it's on the active side of the tree, and Binah, which is understanding and reception. Those are what is known as the 4 worlds of the Kabbalistic tree. Let's look at some basic concepts in Freemasonry, often a very misunderstood occult tradition, often not understood as an occult tradition because of its overtones in the modern day as a simple lodge system and a simple fraternal order. True esoteric Freemasonry is much more than that and has become very diluted in the modern day because of the modern lodge system. Often, many of the lodge systems are not even teaching the esoteric aspects and the proper understanding of Masonic symbolism at all in their lodge systems. I've criticized it greatly due to that and tried to really break down some of the very powerful spiritual allegorical symbolism in this tradition in my own work. Freemasonry is considered by its adherents to be a system of morality, which is veiled in allegory and illustrated by symbols. Now, some people, would never think of it as such because of the connotations that they view modern Freemasonry as. Again, You could look at something like what the modern church is doing, covering up pedophilia crimes, chief among them, compared to what the original Christian tradition was supposed to be about. And really, never the twain shall meet at this point in our world. Freemasonry is kind of very similar to that. I tell people you want to really go down to the depths and study the esoteric aspects of the tradition instead of what its so-called adherents are doing in the modern day. And if you understand the difference between the two, then this tradition becomes very rich in spiritual symbolism and teachings. The first 3 degrees of Freemasonry, or levels of knowledge communicated to the new Masonic initiates, are in order. First degree is entered apprentice, second degree fellow craft, and third degree master mason. These symbolically represent the 3 aspects of consciousness: thought, emotion, and action, respectively. Freemasonry is actually an ancient esoteric tradition which is ultimately about knowing the self, becoming a builder, a mason, of a better mind and soul, and ultimately the resurrection of morality within a human being. Resurrection being one of the key conceptual ideas in this tradition. And that goal, resurrecting oneself, is personified by the legend of the master builder Hiram Abiff, which we'll briefly talk about. Just want to touch upon this symbolism here, the compasses and square with the G in the middle. The square in this orientation usually represents base consciousness or material world identification. The compasses represent higher knowledge, compassion, true intelligence through balance, and circumscribing the base instincts. That process is directed by care, the sacred feminine generative principle, which is what the G in the middle esoterically represents. Many Masons will tell you that G means many different things. In its pure esoteric interpretation, it corresponds to true care, or the generative principle through which we ultimately create our reality. Resurrection, a huge theme in the Masonic tradition, ultimately embodied by the Masonic Christ figure, you might call him, Hiram Abiff, the master builder in the Masonic allegories. He's seen here in a coffin as a deadened form of consciousness, as true spirituality being in a grave, in a tomb. And the goal was to resurrect that divine spark or essence through getting in touch with truth and using the generative principle of care. Again, you see the all-seeing eye figure in an upward pointing pentacle at the top of the image. The whole goal of Freemasonry, true esoteric Freemasonry, is to become born again into conscience through the light of knowledge of the difference between right and wrong, or in other words, natural law. It is a system of teaching natural law in its pure form. The coffin tracing board of the third degree on the right-hand side is Hiram Abiff's grave. You see the skull and crossbones on the right-hand side on top of the coffin, representing the forces by which we will bury spirit if we only engage in intellect and action alone, not actually really using our spiritual insight to gauge morality, to gauge what moral action really is. The acacia sprig at the top of the grave is a symbol of the hope of resurrection, that natural law and morality can be communicated and received ultimately. Again, this tradition is very tied in with the Kabbalistic tradition. You'll see that the tracing board of the first degree is very similar to the Kabbalistic tree of life in many ways. The tools at the bottom of the tracing board represent the 3 tools by which Hiram Abiff was killed or murdered. And they represent the tools of the lack of knowledge, understanding, and wisdom, the things that ultimately kill it. If you don't engage in knowledge, you have ignorance. If you don't engage in understanding, you have confusion and the lack of care to come to the understanding. And if you don't engage in wisdom, you're not engaging in right action, and therefore you're in a state of cowardice and laziness, not engaging the masculine principle. That's what those 3 tools represent that ultimately the failure of the three aspects of consciousness are what put Hiram Abiff in his tomb and ultimately get you headed toward the western direction instead of the eastern direction, toward darkness instead of light. The goal here is to be resurrected and therefore to be born into the light again of conscience and knowledge of the difference between right and wrong behavior. The first degree tracing board I call a key to the mysteries, literally because the key is one of the central components of the board. So this tracing board symbolically represents the Temple of Solomon in the Masonic tradition, in biblical allegory as well, where this symbolism is drawn from. You have the pillar on the left-hand side, which is the Joachim pillar, representing the masculine aspect of consciousness, solar or masculine, left brain. You see the symbol of the sun at the top. It is a Doric pillar, which is masculine architectural style. The S at the bottom of the pillar represents strength, and the tool at the bottom is the level, meaning that we need to have balance in our action. The right-hand column or pillar is the pillar of Boaz. It is a feminine pillar represented by the Corinthian design. This side of this tracing board represents the lunar or feminine qualities of consciousness, epitomized by the symbol of the moon at the top, and the letter B represents beauty, a feminine aspect. The tool at the bottom is the plum rule, which represents uprightness in our spirit. The middle pillar is the synthesis between the two, representing thought, creation. The W stands for wisdom. It could stand for will as well. And it's an ionic pillar. Again, the all-seeing eye is over top of the pillar, the ionic pillar, the ion pillar. It's some wordplay, some symbolic wordplay. Again, the directions are very significant. The east is toward the direction of the light, toward the direction of the rising sun and the awakening of consciousness. The checkerboard floor at the bottom represents base consciousness, not having started, the unbegun, the checkered life of an individual who doesn't know the difference between right and wrong and isn't following the light, and therefore they're ending up in situations that they don't intend to. They could be played like pieces on a chessboard when they're identified with worldly consciousness. The two ashlars or blocks at the end of the tracing board, at the rear of it, represent two different forms of life. One in a very rough, unfinished form, and one where a person has worked upon their life during its duration and made wise use of their time to actually hone out their ashlar and refine it. The ladder, of course, represents getting off the floor of the house and beginning the journey into enlightenment toward the sun. The three initiates represent the three main levels of Freemasonic initiation: entered apprentice, fellow craft or journeyman, and master mason at the top of the ladder. The ladder moves from the moon to the sun, or from darkness to light, passing through the balance point, which is wisdom. And the key in the middle represents care. The key to all of it is what we care about. That's the key that can unlock the sun or the star gate at the top of the ladder. But it's dangling by a thread, representing the care and emotion regarding the acquisition of knowledge of self and natural law is hanging in a precarious position. Yet if we grasp onto that key of care, that is the way out. And again, that's why I called the first degree a tracing board, a key to the mysteries, literally. I hope that's an adequate explanation. It took me about 10 years of my life to deeply understand the symbolism on this board, and I'm still finding new things in it. But this is almost kind of given to new initiates as a form of subtle mockery, because the higher level initiates of this tradition in the modern world know that the lower level initiates aren't going to decode this. They're not going to know any of the symbolism allegorically. And so they're kind of like throwing the entire tradition in their face at the very beginning. Like, good luck with that. Good luck figuring out what that means, When we turn the board on its side, it reveals even more esoteric meanings. You could see that the checkerboard floor, if you look at that as earth identified consciousness, the lines of the checkerboard become the lines of latitude and longitude of the earth. And then the pillars become the equator of the earth. The middle pillar becomes the equator, and the other pillars become the tropics. The Tropic of Cancer at the top and the Tropic of Capricorn at the bottom, representing respectively the high and low point of light during the course of the year and the path of the sun, the respective path of the sun around the earth during the course of the year. So, we get winter at the bottom represented by the moon, the low point of light, and summer at the top representing the high point of the sun, with the latter leaving the earth and journeying out of darkness and into light, or out of chaos and toward order, toward the east, toward the realm of the gods, toward higher consciousness, toward the rising sun and the light of knowledge. Incredibly powerful symbolism, just brilliantly portrayed for those who are capable of decoding it. I call this the sigil of all masonry, a very deeply misunderstood seal that combines a lot of different symbolism, which I'm going to attempt to break down here today and help people to understand why this is the ultimate symbol of all forms of masonry, both light and dark. This symbol does not represent one thing, and it is not, you can't look at this in a unidimensional way of decoding the symbolism. It doesn't work like that. This is a dual symbol, very multifaceted. So there's five basic elements to this symbolism. You have the two phrases, annuit coeptis and novus ordo seclorum, which we'll break down in a moment. You have the all-seeing eye with the rays of light coming from it. You have the unfinished pyramidal structure built in stone or brick, and then you have the earth itself, okay? So those are the five basic elements that we can symbolically decode in this symbol. We have the earth and then the two other pieces of symbolism other than the words, the pyramid made of stone and the all-seeing eye and light. Okay, so the all-seeing eye and light represents knowledge, the spark of the divine, unity consciousness, alignment with natural law, aligning our own thoughts, emotions, and actions such that as we think, so we feel, so we act, and there's no contradiction between those three modes of consciousness. The light represents the creator. The eye represents the eye of the creator of the universe, shedding light into our physical domain, bathing the world in light. The brick represents heaviness, weightiness, a fixed position, no flow, hardness, rigidity, okay? Weighing down, blocking things, building barriers between things, right? Blocking the light out. That's what you do with that building material, with stone, okay? It's the exact opposite of light. So really you only have two qualities of building material portrayed on the earth, light and stone. They're the two building materials of masonry. Symbolically, in masonry, you are either building with light or you are building with stone, one or the other. Okay? If you're building with light, that means you're building with truth. You're building with knowledge. If you're building with stone, you're erecting barriers between people and obfuscating things. Now, the phrases, annuit coeptis, means, in Latin, annuit, third person singular present tense. Annuit means he, she, or it favors or looks favorably upon something. Coeptis means an enterprise, an undertaking, or a work in progress, a project that is actively being built but not completed yet. So put them together, annuit coeptis. He, she, or it favors our project, favors our undertaking, favors our work, favors our building. Well, what is that work? The bottom banner tells you what it is. Novus ordo seclorum. literally translates as new order of the world, not of the ages. The Latin word seclorum would be of the ages. Seclorum means of the world or of the universe in Latin. So that phrase down there literally translates as new world order, unequivocally. So he favors our work, or he, she, or it favors our work, the new world order. Well, I would tell you that's the work of the light occultists and the work of the dark occultists, depending on which building material you are working with. So, let's look at what we would build if we are building with light as a light occultist or a de-occultist who wants to communicate truth. What would happen if we only build with light? And what another form of Mason does, what a Mason also does, is he tears down walls. He doesn't just build walls, he tears them down. So if we were to tear down the heaviness, the weightiness, the things that block us from the truth, the brick, the pyramid, the stone, the trap for souls, which is what the truncated pyramid ultimately represents. What would we have if we take the light of the Creator and remove the rest of the material? You'd only have the eye. You would only have the spiritual insight. You would only have the light of knowledge. You would only have the light of truth, the light of the Creator. There would be nothing else in the scene. That's what happens when when the light workers or the light masons complete their task of transmuting the stone into light, or in other words, transmuting ignorance into knowledge. The God of creation favors our work, the positive or light new world order of truth, love, and freedom. Conversely, what if we tried to put all of the light out of the scene? If this represents the world in a transition between light and darkness, going one way or the other, what if the dark occultists are trying to put out the light of the Creator from the world? Then what happens in the scene? Well, something like this happens, and watch it very carefully. The brick is completed, and it blocks out the Creator's light. And therefore, you have a permanent, completed male dominator structure, a structure that represents slavery, the light being blocked out from the world, and male dominance ruling the entire world as a prison for slaves. That's the dark New World Order. Oh yeah, the dark God favors their work, the dark New World Order. A world without the light of the Creator, a world without knowledge except for a very tiny few using it to enslave the masses of humanity. That's the dark New World Order for sure. So if we go back to this symbol as the world in transition, as I like to call it, the sigil of all Masonry, we can see how there's two different outcomes depending on which building material we are working with and which New World Order we're seeking to create. The dark occultists are trying to block out the light of creation from this world and erect the dark New World Order, a male dominator world without light, where dark occultists rule an ignorant, enslaved population with an iron fist, a spiritual prison for lost souls. Conversely, if we build the true light New World Order, we reach universal enlightenment and evolution through wisdom and personal responsibility. Truth, love, and freedom prevail, and the will of creation is fulfilled. It's what I call the one true great work, with the goals being truth, love, and freedom. And that is a variation on the sigil of Masonry that I came up with. And a very nice listener to my show actually carved this in wood for me and sent it to me, which I have actually hung up over my work area in my home. Just a really great piece of work and a labor of love in and of itself, which I thought was really kind of him to do. I hope that powerfully illustrates some of the symbolism of Freemasonry and helps people to understand what lies at the heart of that tradition if it's properly understood and its allegories and symbolism is properly decoded. and how you can understand there's a lot of two-dimensionality or multifaceted dimensionality in occult symbolism. I'll briefly touch on the tarot here because I'm going to more extensively touch on the major arcana of the tarot in the last section today. Tarot is infinitely more than fortune telling. Unfortunately, it's become synonymous with it in the modern day. The tradition of tarot uses rich, multifaceted symbolism portrayed upon a deck of 78 cards to convey truths regarding the aspects of our own being and the laws of the cosmos. The tarot deck consists of two components, the major arcana and the minor arcana. Again, you see the correlation to occult knowledge in general. Okay? The major arcana consists of 22 cards, 11 of which deal with the aspects of the human psyche, with aspects of the human psyche, and 11 of which deal with aspects of natural law. Again, I'm going to break down those 22 cards in the final section of the presentation today. The minor arcana consists of 56 cards divided into 4 suits: wands, cups, swords, coins, and coins, each consisting of 14 cards, each suit consisting of 14 cards, ace through 10 cards, plus 4, quote, court cards for each suit. Sadly, in modern times, the tarot is looked upon by many people as being nothing more than a prop in the repertoire of fortune tellers, quote unquote. While the system of cards could be used as an intuitive divinatory aid to ask and answer questions about what individuals' prospective future may look like, this is considered by serious students of the tarot tradition to be an ancillary usage of the tarot deck at the very best. The tarot was traditionally seen in its pure esoteric form as a means of conveying deep truths through covert means, without needing to write down or even speaking the occult message aloud. If a picture is worth 1,000 words, as the saying goes, a tarot deck, when deeply understood, speaks countless millions of words. It is a book. It is more than a book. It's a lifetime of lessons encoded into the symbolism. And if you really deeply study it, there's nothing that's not in it. Just briefly, I want to talk about the suits of the deck. The suit of coins, depicted in green here, again represents earth, or the inherent qualities of the individual, and it is associated with the material plane. The suit of swords represents air or intellect, the mental plane. The suit of cups is correlated with water, and it represents our emotional qualities, the emotional plane. And finally, the suit of wands, depicted in the bottom right in red, represents the plane of will, or our actions, the masculine components of our psyche, represented alchemically by the symbol of fire, the upward pointing triangle. The Wheel of Fortune card, which is card number 10 in the major arcana, has some iconography on it that kind of tells us about what the tarot itself actually is and is intended to be used for. Many people call the tarot the goddess's book, the book of truth, or the wheel of truth, because of the symbolism on this particular card. Again, of course, the word tarot is actually in this card. If you start at the top, progress counterclockwise, and then come back to the top, the T at the top. If you reorganize the 4 letters of this card in order, in various configurations, you come up with 6 words that actually teach a lesson in and of themselves. The word rota, R-O-T-A, in Latin is the noun wheel. Again, the tarot is known as a wheel because it kind of loops back upon itself, and the symbolism is consistent with itself, and portrays the occult aspect of correspondence. That which is above is like to that which is below. We're going to see that greatly when we talk about the macrocosmic, the microcosmic tree of the major arcana, and then the macrocosmic tree of the major arcana. The word tarot itself is a phonetic equivalent. T-A-R-O is a phonetic equivalent of T-A-R-O-T. The Latin verb A-R-O-T, third person singular, arot, from the Latin verb arare, means to cultivate or to grow or to order something, to bring order to. The Latin verb orare, which is where we get O-R-A-T, orat, means to plead. It actually means to make an impassioned treaty, to beseech or to entreaty, an impassioned entreaty. It means to passionately ask somebody to do something. Not like beg as in, I'm begging you, give me this, but please do this, something like that. So we get the word orator, oration, meaning speech from that verb. The word Torah, it's a Hebrew word meaning law, T-O-R-A-H, transliterated into English from the Hebrew. T-O-R-A would be a phonetic equivalent, and then Ator would be a phonetic and truncated form of the Egyptian goddess of love, Hathor, who many people say that the tarot deck was dedicated to or patterned after the teachings of Ma'at, Hathor, and Isis, other different forms of Egyptian goddesses. That's why many people call it the Book of the Goddess. So we put all these together: wheel, tarot, cultivate or grow, plead, law, Hathor. The wheel of tarot cultivates or brings order or helps us to grow. It pleads the law of Hathor. You could say this as the wheel of tarot brings order by asking us to learn natural law or the law of love. Powerful symbolism right in the words that we can just, look at in a simple symbolic card. And that's only one of the cards. Again, I'm going to break down the tarot in more depth later. I'm just very cursorily touching on some of these traditions because I want to move on to symbolism shortly. Rosicrucianism is the next occult tradition I want to say a few words about. It comes from the Latin, the word itself, Rosicrucian, comes from the Latin noun rosa, meaning rose, and the Latin noun crux, crucius, meaning cross or crucifixion. Rosicrucianism is a tradition of esoteric Christianity that is based upon allegory and symbolism, as are most occult traditions. Its mythical founder is Christian Rosenkreutz, again, another Christ figure, another wisdom teacher figure, allegorically, symbolically in the tradition. Christian Rosenkreutz represents the soul on its journey into knowledge and enlightenment in the Rosicrucian tradition and its allegories. This is called the Rose Cross in the Rosicrucian tradition. This particular variant of it, I believe, came out of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, which dealt with Freemasonry, which dealt with tarot, which dealt with Hermetics, and certainly dealt with Rosicrucianism and Kabbalah, all of these traditions. The main symbol of the Rosicrucian tradition is the Rose Cross. The Rose Cross, the rose part of the Rose Cross represents the spirit and its symbolic crucifixion in the world of matter, its descent into the material plane. The cross represents the world of matter itself, its four arms representing the four elements of earth, air, water, and fire in the material domain. This is another popular variant of the Rose Cross, with the white cross in the middle of the five-pointed star or pentacle, representing earth, air, water, fire, plus spirit in its properly oriented position at the top of the five-pointed star, representing spirit in ascendancy or in a more important position over the realm of matter, the purely identified material world elements. The cross in the middle is white, representing purity, and then there are 7 crosses in a U or magnet shape, again, very symbolic. I would suggest representing the 7 Hermetic principles, the laws of nature, bound by true care in the middle, the purest of the principles of natural law, the principle of care. Again, that magnet representing the law of attraction that you form, and also representing you, the individual, the self. The ultimate teaching of the Rosicrucian tradition as a form of esoteric Christianity is the universal spiritual law of oneness, as it is called in the tradition. This law is most commonly known as the Golden Rule in exoteric Christianity. Simply put, this law states, treat others as you would yourself, for there is no true separation in nature. If another suffers, oneself suffers. If one being is suffering, all beings are suffering. That level of unity needs to be recognized if we're really going to transcend the current human condition. Again, a beautiful allegorical tradition, Rosicrucianism, if properly understood. I highly recommend the works of Rudolf Steiner and Max Heindel, in particular, if you want to learn more about Rosicrucian tradition. The next tradition is Theosophy. Theosophy comes from the Greek nouns theos, meaning God or divinity, and the Greek noun sophos, meaning wisdom. Thus, Theosophy literally means the divine wisdom, or the wisdom of the divine. Theosophy is a symbol of esoteric philosophy, which investigates and seeks direct knowledge of the mysteries of being and nature. You just see the theme over and over again. Constantly comes back to the same thing. Being and nature. The individual, the psyche, and the laws of creation, and the laws of the cosmos. Both in the seen realm and in the unseen realm. The laws that operate in the seen are the physical laws. Those that operate in the unseen are the spiritual laws. The theme is consistent throughout all of the occult traditions. Although it is an ancient philosophy, Theosophy was popularized by a 19th century occultist named Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, who founded the Theosophical Society and wrote many famous works of occult teaching. The Theosophical Society's mantra is, "There is no religion higher than truth." I would take it farther and say, there is no religion other than truth. Truth is the only real, true religion. Everything else is a paltry imitation that is an exoteric variant that has been co-opted and polluted over time, that isn't really hitting the core of the bullseye, so to speak. I like to attend the United Lodge of Theosophists in Philadelphia from time to time. Barb and I attend it, sit in on readings of occult philosophy and ancient Vedic philosophy as well, that they talk about sometimes, and very powerful readings and discussions happen in some of those groups, and it's always an uplifting experience. The main tenets of Theosophy as taught by Helena Blavatsky are the same tenets found in many other occult schools. Chief among these is the belief in the presence of a divine spark within every person, which, with the proper discipline and training, can lead to spiritual illumination or, quote, enlightenment. Theosophy's adherents consider themselves as searchers after truth, who are dissatisfied with the world and are dissenters of the creeds of organized religion. So it's not a belief system. They don't consider it a belief system. They consider themselves simply searchers after truth, which can be known and can be described by models of occult science. Theosophists do admit to the existence of a creator or a God, but not necessarily to the existence of a personal God. They see nature or law as God, as an impersonal force that is simply operating in the physical domain. I tend to see God as law myself. That's, you had to tell me what is one word that you would equivalate with God, that you would give as an equivalent to the concept of God. I would not use the word love. I would use the word law. But once you understand them, it's the same thing. You know, we'll get to that when we talk about thelema. But I would use the word law first and foremost to represent what God actually is. Theosophy also teaches that humanity has had many past incarnations, the whole species, or variations on Earth, which it calls root races. These root races should not be seen as genetic races, which many other people that followed some of the Theosophists' work in the late 19th and earlier 20th parts of the 20th century perverted theosophical work and tried to take it on board, and twist it to their, agendas. This really happened in the early Nazi tradition as Nazism was rising in Germany. They tried to take some of these teachings and twist them into, racial divisions and, support different racial purity ideologies. But that is not how theosophy teaches them in its pure form. These root races should never be seen as genetic races, but rather as different types of civilization that had attained different levels of consciousness. Theosophy teaches, in keeping with the Hermetic principle of rhythm, that there is a cyclical quality or wave-like progression to time. It doesn't mean time moves endlessly in unvariable cycles. It means that it has a quality within it that generates a wave-like progression of choice points from which we can learn and grow, and at different times, through knowledge of what happened in past wave cycles, choose different results for ourselves. So it teaches that time has this cyclical or wave-like quality, progression to it, which imparts lessons and influences consciousness to produce certain outcomes. If humanity cannot raise their consciousness to a high enough level of awareness during the recurrence of such wave cycles, they may then experience setbacks in their evolutionary progression in the form of semi-extinction level events or cataclysms, which necessitate a restarting of humanity from a subsequent root race. And I think we're well along the way to that outcome, personally. I think nature only tolerates so much before it says, here comes a comet, let's see what you make of that. How about a supervolcanic eruption, a caldera going off in the middle of the land in which you live, and let's see what you make of that. That's what nature eventually does, because there's too many weeds choking the garden. And that's what humanity has become. And invariably, when the darkness of ignorance progresses to a level of total calcification, eventually nature says no more, this far and no further. We're not quite there yet, but we're getting there pretty fast, which is why this information needs to be brought forward, and people really have to start seeing things as they really are instead of as they want them to be. I think this is the last tradition I'm going to cover. It's called Thelema, one of my favorite occult traditions. Thelema is a system of magical practices and tenets developed by the 20th century, quote, gray magician, Aleister Crowley. And everybody's going to say, oh, Mark, you're promoting Crowley again. He was such a bad guy. Why are you putting people onto his work? Why are you talking about him like he was somebody to look up to? I'm telling you out in the open, gray magician. Somebody who knew the path and didn't necessarily walk it, who used what he knew for negative influence over other people to control. Although he also put out a lot of great spiritual works which were out there to illuminate and enlighten people. So he's an enigma. He's a puzzle, Crowley. Here's the example I always tell people when dealing with Crowley's work. Do as I say, not as I do. Okay? If you're talking about Crowley, do as he said, not as he did. He didn't necessarily walk the path in his life. The main precept of the occult tradition of Thelema is, quote, do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. This precept is far too often completely misunderstood and completely taken out of context. Used properly, do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law refers to the Thelemic concept of the true will. It's a central focus of the whole occult system, the true will. The true will represents a human being's true purpose and path in life, which exists in, I'm sorry, I have a mistake there. It should say exists in harmony with the will of the universe. I'll correct that in the slides before this video goes to press. This is the path upon which we are guided when we have learned to hear and follow the teachings of the higher self and natural law. That means we are doing the true will. We have gotten what we want out of the way. You know, how many, to learn what I have learned, to put together what I have put together, and again, not tooting my own horn, I'm just making a statement about the level of work and sacrifice that was required to even get to this level of understanding. Okay? I had to set aside things I wanted to do for me, for myself, to be here today, to put this together, the time invested, you know? Again, I want to be doing other things. Mark Passio wants to be doing other things, okay? Mark Passio's alignment with the true will says, can't be doing other things and still be doing the true will. Sorry, but it doesn't work that way. Therefore, I'm putting aside Mark Passio's desires and saying, we got to get to the great work and start getting it done, you know? So that's what the true will really is about. It's not about what I want. It doesn't mean do whatever you want. That's how people who have absolutely no understanding of Thelema or Crowley's intent or writings try to say it means. It absolutely doesn't mean that at all, never did. Crowley never interpreted it like that, never told one living human being that that's what it meant. It's called people who are completely profane when it comes to these teachings and haven't looked into it an iota for themselves, want to make up what they think it means. Okay? Used properly, it refers to the Thelemic concept of the true will, a human being's true purpose and path in life, and that is what we begin to do when we learn to listen to the voice of the higher self and when we learn to listen to natural law's teachings. For those called to the path of Thelema, the true will refers to the great work of truth, love, and freedom. Do what thou wilt does not mean to do whatever you want. To do the true will is the apotheosis of freedom. It means you are putting freedom up on such a pedestal, you are elevating it to the level of divinity. It is the will of the Creator. Freedom is the will of the Creator of the universe. And that's what Thelema is teaching. But the true will is also the strictest possible bond. As Crowley said, do thy will and no other shall say nay. Not my will be done, thy will be done. The will of creation be done. Let nothing deflect you from that austere and holy task. True freedom is absolutely to do thy will. Seek to do anything else whatsoever, and instantly obstacles will arise. Every act that is not in harmony with the true will is erratic and acts as a hindrance in one's life and creates chaos, not only in one's life, but in society in general. The Thelemic principle of do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law must remain in context with the statement which follows it. Love is the law. Love is the law. Love under will, which means love must be the foundation of the will. True care must underlie and support our actions. This means that any act of human will must be performed with love or higher consciousness as its foundation, or the result. The resultant product will ultimately be chaotic. Only action based upon love and therefore in harmony with morality and natural law could ever produce order, either in our personal lives or in society as a whole. This symbol, by the way, is known as the universal hexagram of Thelema. The unicursal hexagram of Thelema, excuse me. Unicursal means it is written in one stroke without taking the pen off the page, without taking the pencil off the paper. Okay? It is the joining of the chalice and blade without them overlapping each other and being separate from each other, like one being like there and then the other being there, over top of each other. It is a combining of them in one fluid motion that is like an eternal loop that keeps looping back upon itself in a state of synthesis. And then the 5-petaled rose representing again the 5 elements in nature, including the spirit. Crowley referred to magic, which he spelled with a K, as, quote, the science and art of influencing change to occur in accordance with the true will. Okay? Now notice that that is different than what I call sorcery. Okay? You're aligning yourself with the will of creation. This clearly distinguishes true magic, or what Crowley referred to as magic with a K, from sorcery, which is, quote, the science and art of influencing change to occur in accordance with the ego-driven will, lowercase w will, of the practitioner. They're two totally different things. Okay? Influencing something to align to creation's will is entirely different than influencing someone or something to align to my own personal selfish will. Crowley also postulated a notion which he called the holy guardian angel, which referred to a deep connection to the higher self, a connection that would guide the Thelemite initiate toward the true will. In order for the holy guardian angel to manifest in our lives, we must learn to listen to its wisdom by quieting the voice of the ego, the force which is at work when we refuse to admit when we have been wrong, the force which ever seeks to take us off the path of wisdom. And that is why Thelema the tradition of Thelema engages in different meditative practices and in different consciousness alteration techniques in order to quiet the egoic mindset, the voice that is constantly chattering saying, I want, I want, I want, I want. Or, I'm not wrong about that, I'm not wrong about that, I'm not wrong about that. You know, that's the ego, really. That's the force that doesn't allow us to see that what we're doing is wrong when we're doing something that's wrong. And it's the force that just keeps saying, I want this, I want that, and forget about all this other stuff over here about truly becoming a better person and helping other people to become better people. You know, we don't have time for that. I have too many things I want. The central text of Thelema is known as Liber al vel legis. Liber means book, al means related to or of, and legis, vel legis means of the law. So the book of the law, more commonly referred to, the book of the law. Crowley claimed that this book was dictated to him through channeled writing, or what is called automatic writing, by a higher spiritual consciousness which he referred to as I was. So he claimed that this was not his own writing, but it was in fact channeled from some type of an entity. Through the reception of this book, Crowley proclaimed the arrival of a new stage in the spiritual evolution of humanity, which he called the Aeon of Horus, the age when humanity would finally begin to align itself with natural law and the will of creation. Again, the aeon of the rising sun, of the birth of real knowledge, the de-occulting of occult wisdom, and the knowledge of the occult coming online to humanity in the form of common sense, shared wisdom. I don't know how far we've come into the age of the Aeon of Horus. You know, there was kind of an occult renaissance going on during that time, and then it kind of got buried again, and you know, we went into all kinds of wars, and then the technological age came in with the advent of television, you know, and people, you know, got lost in childish sports and, you know, idle distractions. So I'll wrap up with a quote from Crowley. The absolute rule of the state shall be a function of the absolute liberty of each individual will. There it is. You know, natural law understood in the aggregate is going to create freedom. Natural law and the true will not done in the aggregate is going to equate to the absolute rule of the state, human slavery. Brilliant in his understanding, not so brilliant in the way he conducted his life, particularly in his later years. Last aspect of occultism I want to touch on is dark occultism. I'm not going to belabor this too long. I just want to really talk about who are these people that I refer to as the dark occultists. You can call them a million different names, folks. Doesn't matter what you call them. You can call them sorcerers. You can call them dark Luciferians, those who have the light and use it for dark purposes. They are Satanists, okay? They are Setians. They are the Klepotic Kabbalists. Klipoth is the region below the tree of life that is the hell world in the Kabbalistic tradition, that is the inversion of all the true teachings of Kabbalah, of the true moral lessons of the true tradition, esoteric tradition of Kabbalah. If you descend into the Klipotic realms, it's the wastelands, the lands of the spent and corrupted souls that are simply husks, that used to be souls and spirits that are just like, withered out husks, the wastelands, in other words. That's Klipotic Kabbalah. They are the dark masons of the world. They are the dark Atonists. Aton was a variation of the sun or the light in the ancient Comitian tradition. Ultimately, it's all one cult, folks. It's the cult of the black sun. You could call them by any name you want, but they are a dark solar cult. Okay? When I say the dark sun, why the black or the dark sun? The sun represents light. It represents knowledge. It represents empowerment. It represents life. The antithesis of that, the total polar inversion of that, is it's still a form of light. It's still the sun, but it has darkness within it. So it's knowledge being used for all the wrong reasons. Knowledge being used to control, not enlighten, not uplift. Knowledge being used to put people in a prison. Knowledge being used as a power differential over people who are still in a level of ignorance. So you're blinding people with that light, and you're enslaving them with it, with that knowledge. That's what these people are. Okay? If you don't even want to look at it in esoteric terms, they're people with the knowledge of how the self works, meaning deep psychology, very ancient, deep knowledge of psychology, combined with people who know about how the laws of nature function, which is very deep, hidden science. That's it. There are the two sciences that are at work. The physical sciences combined with psychology. And then you put the understanding of how moral law functions into there, which they know as well, and rebel against because they want to be gods on earth and they want to conquer the natural law consequences or evade them to the longest amount of time that they possibly can. They're all the same cult. It doesn't make a difference who we're talking about here. You could be talking about Satanists, Setians, the worshippers of the great owl at Bohemian Grove, the Skull and Bones Order of Death, the cult of the Black Sun that came out of the Nazi and SS party of Germany. All right, in the modern day, they're top-level international bankers, top-level political figures, top-level financiers, high-level religionists, high-level members of royalty, so-called royal families, judiciary, military, high-level military, people involved at highest levels of media, highest levels of medicine, highest levels of education. Again, highest levels of all religious systems on the earth, and anybody's religion out there is not exempt from that. So-called cultural religions. Secret societies and fraternal orders, think tanks, intelligence agencies, you name it. This is where the highest concentration of dark occultists are at. This is who they are. This is how they operate in the world. These are the institutions who determine how people's lives will be run, because we let them. And at the top level of every one of these institutions, you're going to find the cult of the Black Sun operating. Helena Blavatsky, the main teacher of the occult philosophy known as Theosophy, tried to warn people about these sorcerers, about this dark solar cult. In her third volume of The Secret Doctrine, she wrote this. And again, Blavatsky gets a bad name like Crowley, and they want to just throw all of her works out and say, oh, there's no wisdom in any of her work because that's the occult and that's bad. People who have never read her work will make statements like this. She said, for the true student of occult lore, white or divine magic could no more exist in nature without its counterpart, black magic, than day without night. Everything in that nature has an occult. a bright and a night side to it. True, magic has lost its name, and along with it, its rights to recognition. But its practice is in daily use. The real truth is that magic is still in full sway amidst mankind, however blind the latter to its silent presence and influence on its members, however ignorant society may be and remain to its daily and hourly beneficent and maleficent effects. Again, the light and the dark side to the occult. The world is full of such unconscious magicians. She's saying even some of the people involved in these institutions use their influence and don't really know that they're employing occult strategies in many cases. They're just using that knowledge. The world is full of such unconscious magicians in politics as well as in daily life, in the church as in the strongholds of free thought. Most of those magicians are, quote, sorcerers, unhappily. Not metaphorically, but in sober reality, by reason of their inherent selfishness. Again, my will be done. Okay? Their revengeful natures, their envy, and their malice. The true student of magic, well aware of the truth, looks on in pity, and if he be wise, keeps silent. Again, I don't agree with that philosophy. Okay? I don't agree with that ideology. I think we need to speak up more than ever regarding this, not keep silent about it. Again, I could present people who I have a great deal of respect for, and I don't have to agree with every single thing that they say. I could still have tremendous amount of respect for what they did get right and for the work that they did share. For every effort made by him to remove the universal cecity, which means blindness, is only repaid with ingratitude, slander, and often curses. Lies and calumny become his lot, and thus the well-wisher is soon torn to pieces as a reward for his benevolent desire to enlighten. And you know what I say? Damn it to hell, so be it. It doesn't matter what people make of it. It doesn't matter whether they don't want to take the wisdom. It doesn't matter whether they don't want to take the knowledge. I'm going to speak it anyway. That's what's going to happen. You know, and that's the level of courage and will that people need to step into. Which, sadly, I don't feel Blavatsky fully made it to. As many occultists didn't. And again, like I said at the beginning of the seminar, how many occult teachers are actually doing this, who claim that they're really knowledgeable of the occult? How many of them are out there sharing that knowledge with people, even in a rudimentary, cursory, introductory sort of way? Hardly any, a paltry number. You could probably count them on one hand. All right, let's move into some breakdowns of occult symbolism, which I think people should enjoy. Occult symbolism is a secret language hidden in plain sight. Symbols are all around us. They're in just about every walk of life that we engage in. From business to shopping to advertising to on the products that we use on a day-to-day basis, everywhere. I've been using them throughout this presentation, to communicate messages in subtle ways, to correspond and correlate ideas. But people say, hey, why do we need to look at symbolism and interpret them and try to understand what symbols mean? Isn't that a big waste of time? You hear this again. The people who say this is all insignificant, again, over and over again, these people are the people who think it's just a political problem. All right? We just have to analyze what's going on in politics, find the right people for the position, the world's going to be fine. It's just we need some reform in government, that's all. And it's not slavery, We just need to reform that financial system. If we just get control over coining the money again, it's going to be hunky-dory, These are the people who would mock and ridicule the study of symbolism entirely. Semiotics, They would say, you don't need to look into symbolism or break it down or try to understand what it means. It's all meaningless. It's just what one person says. It's their interpretation. And I agree. There are interpretations of symbolism, and not all symbolism means one thing. It can have many different interpretations. What I want to help people to understand is what's really being conveyed, being spoken. There's an energetic vibration that goes along with symbols. That's why they call it a symbol. It resonates something. It rings something. It sends out a vibration into human consciousness. And if you don't understand what that symbol, the frequency that resonates at because of its pure form, you're getting hit with that frequency, you're getting hit with that message, and you don't even understand what's being said to you. It's a form of illiteracy. It would be like me literally speaking another language that none of you understood to a person in the room, and I could talk about all of you behind your back without your knowledge. Well, that's what's being done through symbolism. And this is done through the use of archetypes. Archetypes are an archetype is an original pattern or model from which all things of that same kind are copied or on which they are all based. So an archetype is a model or a first form. It could be seen as a prototype of something, a first thing that then you pattern something later on, or you build upon or expand on later. So I've just put 5 basic archetypes here. There's many of them. I mean, we could look at the archetype of the lightning bolt, the diamond, the simple rudimentary fish, the simple wave pattern. You can go on and on forever just on archetypes. These are 5 real simple ones. I just wanted to give you a general idea of what some of these could be used to communicate. A circle, it's considered the perfect shape. It represents eternity because there's no beginning and no end. It represents wholeness or completeness. It represents perfection, fluidity, completeness, the divine. It's the shape that generally is used to represent God or divinity. Conversely, the square is the seeming opposite. It has rough edges. It's very rigid, 90-degree angles, not really found in nature. It represents stability, however. It represents groundedness, earthliness, rigidity, imperfections, base consciousness, earthly nature. Very simply conveyed in a shape, especially when we compare the two against each other, and you could see the inherent differentiation between them. The triangle, as the simplest enclosed form, it represents balance, synthesis, coming together of opposites, union, sharpness, intellect, etc. Again, that symbol, the blade, represented the intellect, represented the masculine quality of consciousness in many ancient traditions. The star represents spirit, sovereignty, achievement, openness, oneness. Hey, you give children stars in school, achievement. Openness and oneness because it represents the human form outstretched. The cross, an ancient symbol of power and authority, strength, focus, and willpower. That's why authoritarians often use it in many different forms. These are the basic forms on which symbolism is based. These are basic vibrations. You could look at these as the small mouth noises that then eventually form words and then whole sentences and whole communicated traditions of meaning, which is what symbolism is about. Symbolism helps us to develop and practice and stay sharp with correlational thinking or correlative thinking. This is so important and so lacking in our society. Okay, when I try to teach some symbolism to like family members, let's say, I'll say, well, in this symbol, the all-seeing eye represents the light and the wisdom of the divine, of the Creator. And many of my family members will just stop me there and say, I totally don't understand what you mean. I cannot correlate or think of an eye inside of a triangle with some rays coming out of it as the Creator's wisdom. You know, the light of reason. How do you equate these two? I'm just trying to explain. It's like, let x equal 10 in algebra. You know, it's an arbitrary decision based on an archetypal form that people who use this symbol came up with. And glassy-eyed, you know, eyes glass over, they don't have this correlative thinking where they can say, let A be equal to B, okay? And give it a value and substitute. They can't do that. That's why, you know, I tutor algebra. It's one of the things I do for the fake form of money. You know, I tutor, high school or college people in algebra. And you could tell right away who has correlative thinking active in them because they take to it, or if they don't have correlative thinking active, they have a real hard time with it. So correlative thinking is what symbolism ultimately fosters. And again, many people don't have it active in them. So, for example, if I establish that pen, the symbol of pen equals 20, okay, and then I also establish bird plus wheel equals 50. You follow me so far? Pen is 20, bird plus wheel equals 50. And finally, I establish pen and bird are equal to each other. Well, what does wheel equal? 30. Now, most people can't do that. Most people on the earth cannot do that. I'm serious. More people alive on the earth cannot do that than can, because they cannot engage in a simple correlation. I know most of my family members can't. I'm not saying that to insult anybody, I'm just telling you how it is. The majority of human beings will not be able to provide the answer for the value of the wheel in that simple correlative exercise, which is simple algebra. And they couldn't explain why that answer is so. Because if pen and bird are equal to each other, since pen equals 20, bird must equal 20. Then we can go over here, plug in the value of 20 into that equation where the bird is at. 20 plus wheel equals 50. Wheel must equal 30. That's why it's so. That's a simple proof of that. So symbolic illiteracy, combined with the widespread absence of correlative thinking, has made it dramatically easier for those who use their knowledge of symbols and archetypes to manipulate behavior at a subconscious level, because they can sneak messages into wherever they want, and the person has no idea that there's an embedded message there, and they have no idea what it means. That's how they do it. And that's why it's significant to study. Now, I'm going to give you a great example of archetypal symbolism applied for mental manipulation. And I tell people, if you want the first example to study about what the occult is, this is one of the examples to look into. This is what the occult is applied in life. This is mind control applied in life. It's not my interpretation of that, it's what it really is. It's not just clever marketing. It's occult concepts that some people know how they work and some people don't, applied for the purpose of one group of people getting what they want at the expense of another group of people. So keep that in mind as I explain the Betty Crocker conundrum. In the early 1950s, a perverted form of Sigmund Freud's psychoanalytical approaches, championed by Freud's nephew Edward Bernays, were sweeping across America, even to the point where the Central Intelligence Agency was using these psychoanalytical approaches for mass control of the population. A great book to read on this is Jim Keith's Mass Control, the Manipulation of Human Consciousness. A place where it proved very successful was in the unassuming kitchens of middle-class families. Betty Crocker Foods had produced an instant cake mix. All you needed to do was add water to the supplied powder. In that time, this was considered somewhat of a miracle, of a minor miracle. The problem was that the miracle cake mixture did not sell at all. And Betty Crocker put a lot of money into research and development to come up with this stuff. They didn't want to have to go back to the drawing board. They wanted to sell what they came up with. In other words, they wanted to make people want it. They didn't want to accept the decree that had been given them, we don't want this. So undaunted, Betty Crocker Foods turned to the science of psychoanalysis to help, quote, solve the problem that they had. In other words, to make people buy something that the company already knew they did not want. Instead of trying to provide a product they did want, they wanted people to want what they had already invested R&D money in and what they had already made and put out onto the shelves that was a complete flop. And there was a reason it was a complete flop, which we'll get to. Crocker hired a Madison Avenue ad campaign firm to investigate through psychoanalytical techniques the underlying reasons that the housewives did not want the cake mix. And they did this through many interview sessions with many housewives. The conclusion of the study was that although the average American housewife very much appreciated the convenience of the cake mix, she felt very guilty about deceiving her husband and family into thinking she had worked hard for them, when in fact she had done very little work and put very little of herself and her own love into the project, as she had done when making a cake from scratch, entirely from scratch. So she was feeling guilt inwardly at having kind of gotten off a little bit easy, not having to do as much work or invest as much time and energy and love into the project of making a cake for her family. The answer offered to Betty Crocker by the psychologists they hired was quite simple. All that needed to be done was to add 3 words onto the instructions on the box of cake mix. Add 1 egg. Add 1 egg. That's it. They just had to say, you provide an egg to this mixture. Now, what's the egg? It's an archetype. It's a symbolic original form. The egg is creative essence. In many ancient cultures, the egg represents the cosmos itself, the womb of creation, the sacred feminine essence from which all life springs. And again, it is the feminine fertility symbol. The egg is what the woman contributes to the birthing process. The egg, as one of the most important and ancient archetypal symbols, holds very deep, often subconscious correspondences to life, birth, and creation, making the entire process of making the cake more meaningful in the housewife's mind. In this way, she would, in proxy, be, quote, giving life to her husband and family by providing the egg. This is how the mind works at a subconscious level. Changing the recipe to add an egg to the mixture offered the guilty housewife a way out by doing more than adding just water, by adding an ingredient which was psychologically intertwined with her own life-giving and creative capabilities. She could assuage her guilt that she was feeling. The end result, sales of Betty Crocker's unwanted cake mix soared. And I couldn't find an original ad that had the 1 egg on it. This was when they ratcheted up the recipe to include 2 eggs. This is from the late 1950s. And you could, if you read this up close, if you blew this up and read it up close, over and over again, they keep talking about the egg. It says, Betty Crocker brings you that special homemade goodness because you add the eggs yourself. Now that, at the bottom, let me see if I can see it. It says, here we go. It's very small print. There are only 2 kinds of cake mixes. This is the only underlined, nationally sold cake mix that lets you add the eggs. The only one that gives you that special homemade goodness. Yep. Light, fluffy cakes. They're made with famous soft silk cake flour, ... and you add the eggs. Over and over again, they keep re-emphasizing this in this one ad. No, it's all accidental. You don't need to know about any of this stuff. Symbolism is insignificant. It has nothing to do with what's going on in your mind at all. Let's look at some solar symbolism next. Again, the meanings of solar symbolism are always intertwined and related to light, life force or essence, the spirit, knowledge, power, enlightenment, growth, strength, kingship, sovereignty, trust, clarity, renewal, and resurrection. Because these are the things that the sun provides. Without it, there is no life. There is, nothing's going to grow on the earth. It symbolically represents the light of knowledge, which can be converted into power when applied. And those concepts were always associated with kingship and sovereignty as well. Now, let's keep that in mind when we see how it's used in product placement and advertising. If you go ShopRite to shop, are you going to be coming home enlightened? Are you going to buy the sun? You're going to come home with the light in your basket? That's what they're doing, symbolically putting the sun behind the basket, the shopping cart. And again, this is always done in proxy. See, they're looking to sell you on what they know you don't already have, what you're lacking, what you want, what you crave. So combine that with food products, combine it with, energy-related products. Again, the sun is the ultimate source of energy. What does the sun have to do with tapping into the lifeblood of the earth and taking oil out of it? Well, they want to correlate the idea that the natural light energy of the sun, they're somehow going to be selling you when they sell you this oil, when it has nothing to do with that. I'll show you in a later section where they know it's the blood of the earth. Literally, it's the lifeblood. And that's why they put the blood drop on many oil logos as well. But every one of these symbols is archetypally bringing the image of enlightenment and the sun into the product placement. Again, what was it another symbol for? Sovereignty, kingship, knowledge, light, trust, sun trust. People have to trust the bank they're going to put their money into. Citibank with the rising sun. Target with the ancient archetypal symbol of the sun. Here's some products you can trust. Lucis Trust, a New Age publishing company. Sovereign Bank. You won't be getting any sovereignty there. You see solar symbolism embedded in architecture. Zodiacal symbolism, astrotheological symbolism, the Arc de Triomphe in the middle of the 12-spoked wheel, representing the 12 houses of the zodiac, the sun's progression through the year. And there you see the rays of the sun right around the street system that the arc sits in the middle of. Hopefully people can see that. I hope it's not washed out too badly. You trust this guy? Well, that's why he's using that logo. He's the new king. You should trust him. He has your better interests in mind, like all presidents do. It's a brilliant symbol, though, and most people never caught on that it was a sun, because it's white in the middle of the American flag colors. But it's a sun coming up over the horizon. Or is it setting below the horizon? I don't know. But, archetypally, that's connecting with trust for people, power, knowledge. The things that somebody like that who's a con man, a confidence man, who wants to gain other people's confidence, wants to portray. And it doesn't make a difference, whether it's him or some Republican, they all do it. Like I said, blood symbolism is another big thing, especially when it comes to banking and oil. You'll see this. You just look for it, you'll see it. And again, the symbolic correlations are to life, the life force, vitality, flow, movement, and fluidity. Well, what are oil and banks all about? Flow, right? Flow of energy, flow of commerce. Well, what are they really telling you? Are you going to a blood bank for your life force energy? That money is your life force. You can't live without it, just like you couldn't live without your blood? Isn't that the deep-seated psychological correlation that they're trying to portray by putting a blood drop and associating it with a bank? And, it doesn't even look like a C, That's the C from Commerce Bank, but it's a blood drop. And very many oil companies use this as well, because they know that oil is not what people claim it is, a fossil fuel. It's a substance that the earth completely renews and regenerates, just like we make new blood when pints of it are taken out of our body. And that's what we're doing. That's what they're doing. They're vampirizing the earth like vampires, taking the blood, sucking the blood out of this planet. Let's look at some astrotheological symbolism. Again, the meanings and interpretations here range from authority and power to intelligence, divinity, again, associated with the heavens, the higher realms, the realm of God, the realm of the angels, the realm of the stars, travel, getting away from here, getting off earth to the higher realms, to the stars and heavens, escape, comfort, pleasure, peace of mind, sexuality embedded in astrotheological symbolism in many cases, fertility and union. And again, these are all things people want. That's why they always work these into symbolism for products. Right? These are the things people want to connect with. It's what they want present in their lives. And so you put that in proxy in the symbol. Now, astrotheology is traditionally used widely in religious traditions, of all religious traditions. Islam uses the iconography of the moon constantly, astrotheological symbolism. Judaism uses the astrotheological symbolism of both the stars and Saturn in its religion. And of course, Christianity uses the astrotheological symbolism of the cross of the zodiac and the symbol of Pisces, because we are in the Piscean age when it comes to the precession of the equinoxes, astronomically. So look at the cross in this symbolism. You have it on the Pope's mitre. You have the fish head of Pisces as the Pope's mitre, the open mouth of the fish on his head. The fish symbol is the representation of Christ in modern Christianity. But this symbol in the ancient Comitian tradition was in its upright position, not on its left side as it is today in its imbalanced form, but in the balanced form with the point pointing upward was the symbol of the Shem-Suhor, which was a group known as the disciples or the followers of Horus, the rising sun. Again, that's what the Christian tradition is it's a retelling of the solar deities of the ancient world, particularly Horus, Tammuz, Dionysus, Mithra, and others. But you see the zodiacal cross of the greater and lesser crosses, or what is known as the cross of St. George and St. Andrew in the middle of Vatican Square. You have the Pope holding the symbol of the cross. You have the cross on his sachet that he's wearing. I mean, it's replete with astrotheological themes, one of them being the cross. Here you see Aries symbolism in product placement. Again, that's connected with comfort and sexuality. The Dodge is actually, the ram there is actually, it's symbolic of the feminine womb, the fallopian tubes in the womb. The Aries symbol of McDonald's and the colors of comfort, red and yellow, which you see constantly associated with food, particularly food that's not so good for you. Again, astrotheological symbolism always associated with comfort. That's why they'll sell you that symbolism in the Starbucks logo as well. The comfort of the goddess, the moon, the crescent moon symbol, the sovereignty of the upward pointing stars. You know, that you're just going to get an overpriced cup of coffee. You're not going to get any of those things, you know. The Saturnian symbolism, constantly the swoosh representing the ring of Saturn, the rings of Saturn. It's been pointed out by many people that Nike is just Enki, you know, in a different order. I find that pretty interesting. But it's about higher realms, communication, trust, sovereignty. That's what astrotheological symbolism always deals with. Travel and escape and comfort, also themes embedded in it. You see so many cars using astrotheological symbolism. This is just a handful of them. Saturn, Mercury, BMW. Saturn and Mercury are blatantly obvious. BMW using the astrotheological cross motif. Star markets and ATMs. The Piscean symbol, mainly in the form of the Vesica Pisces, or the overlapping circles, in many products. Chanel, it's a womb, it's a rudimentary womb symbol. And they're using it for union. Masculine and feminine union, comfort, associating it with flow, fluidity, money, trust, etc. Pentagram or pentacle symbolism, used by many different schools of the occult, one of the rudimentary archetypal symbolism in occultism. We've briefly gone over this already. The 5 points of the pentacle or pentagram represent the 4 elements of earth, air, water, and fire, corresponding respectively to the physical plane aspects of inherent qualities and characteristics with earth, intellect with air, emotion with water, and will with fire. And then they're ruled over ultimately by the spirit or the quintessence or the 5th element, which represents spirit. And in its proper position, this point would be placed upward over the other 4, not saying that spirit is totally superior to the material world forces, but that it ultimately governs them and is acting as a balance point between them, through which we really need to identify and find balance so that we're not lost and owned by the material world senses. Now, most of the time, dark occultists will take this symbolism and reverse it. It's another thing I want to say about dark occultism in general, is they don't create much on their own. They take what's already there and they pervert and they corrupt. They use things that are there and just change them energetically. They don't really have much of a creative essence to do new things. They just use what somebody else has already used to represent one thing, and then they reverse it. Similar to how the Nazi Party reversed the Vedic symbol of the swastika, which traditionally represented positive solar energy, good fortune, and enlightenment. And they took that, turned it the opposite direction, made it the crooked cross of the SS and the Nazi Party, and they turned it into a symbol of death, bad fortune, destruction, and totalitarianism, which is just a perversion of what it formerly meant. So you'll see this used in control institutions and in dark occult orders, the pentagonal symbolism reversed. Here you see it in the Victoria Police's logo. They're not upholding your rights, folks. They're upholding the divine right to rule of the crown. That's why the crown sits atop the inverted pentagram. The spiritual point is thrust downward into the ground, and they're not upholding anybody's rights but who they consider the sovereign, some clown who thinks that they have the divine right to rule over other people because of the nature of their bloodline that they were born from. You see this done in some fraternal orders, like the Fraternal Order of Police, and in the woman's Masonic affiliate order, the Order of the Eastern Star. Of course, you have the pentagonal symbolism at the pentagram building, the center of intelligence in the United States, and that exactly correlates to the middle of an inverted pentagram. Now, when it comes to inverted pentagonal symbolism or pentagram symbolism, one of the best examples is the street system of Washington, D.C., just above the White House. And again, people will debate this and insist there's nothing to this, and because of a specific reason, which I'll get to in a moment. But this is the White House from a Google Maps image, seen from overhead, and you are, I believe, looking due north is in the upward direction. So directly above, in the northern direction, which Masonically is considered a place of darkness, pointing down toward the White House is an inverted pentagram embedded in the street system. Now, people will say, well, that's not even a complete reverse pentagram. One of the biggest types of pentagrams in dark occult symbolism is known as the Faustian pentagram, particularly used in Satanism and other forms of dark occultism. A Faustian pentagram deliberately leaves one arm absent or broken And what that symbol represents is a pact with the evil or chaotic force in the world. It represents a pact with the force of entropy and darkness, that power will be delivered unto you and into your hands if you agree essentially to give your life essence or soul over to that force. Hence, the Faustian pentagram is also often referred to as the pentagram of pacts. Now, the people who bash researchers who look at the symbolism in the street system of Washington, D.C. as a form of geomancy, which is what this is, directing energy through architecture and lines of energy on the earth, will say, how could you even say that represents an inverted pentagram when, that arm isn't there, that last part of it isn't there? What I'm trying to explain to you is that makes it all the more indicative that this was a deliberately created design that deliberately left that arm specifically open because it represents a Faustian pentagram. But people who don't look into the dark occult would never understand the concept of the Faustian pentagram, never have come across it at all. It comes from the German play Faust, in which Dr. Faustus sells his soul to the demon Mephistopheles for worldly power. So that's pentagram symbolism. Let's take a look at the symbolism of the all-seeing eye, which we've already really gone into. Of course, this represents God, the creator, divinity, source, light, knowledge, truth, intelligence, the spark of the divine, sovereignty, and unity consciousness. The Trinity. Used all over the place in iconography in government, in media, banking, financial institutions, intelligence agencies, fraternal orders, etc. Very popular symbolism. And so you see it in the Information Awareness Office. They want to be God and be omnipotent, have all knowledge of everything that's going on the earth, working with many other intelligence agencies. British Secret Service, the MI5 with the eye at the top of the pyramid. CBS logo of the eye. Of course, we looked at the sigil of the reverse of the Great Seal of the United States on the back of the dollar bill, what I call the sigil of all Masonry. The all-seeing eye is prominently used in Freemasonry. There you see it used with the compasses and square with the G. It's used in some financial institutions, and it was part of the AOL logo. The illuminated torch symbolism, yet again, another symbol that represents light, knowledge, truth, intelligence, and clarity. And of course, we see this carried by the Statue of Liberty. Not necessarily, none of these symbols are necessarily bad, folks. We can't look at this as all subversive. Some symbolism is used to convey uplifting messages and qualities. I don't look at the some researchers look at the Statue of Liberty and say that's the dark occultist negative variant of the goddess. I personally don't see it as such. I see it as a very positive symbol of exactly what they talk about it as: liberty, freedom, through knowledge, through enlightenment. She's holding a book. The word book, liber, in Latin, it meant two things in Latin. It meant book and it meant free. The same word meant book and free, L-I-B-E-R, which is where the word liberty comes from. They were correlating those concepts deliberately. That if you have knowledge through books about what's really going on in the world and what is really going on within yourself that you've studied, that you're then going to look into in yourself, and you have read about and learn lessons about history, about what people did wrong in the past, and learn about natural law and how it works through wise people bringing it down to you through time, through hard work and sweat and blood and sacrifice to preserve that knowledge. Maybe, just maybe, that's going to correlate with the concept of freedom, with the state of freedom too. So I see that as a representation of the positive aspect of the goddess, who was a goddess of love, truth, and freedom. I see the Columbia Pictures logo as being positive as well. but it's certainly goddess symbolism, and the illuminated torch there representing knowledge. It was used on the back of the dime with, I believe it was, I don't know if that's holly, and there's another plant there with it, but, yep, laurel, right? And then the Amoco illuminated torch in their oil logo. So different people will use symbols for different purposes, but ultimately it's representing something that they want you to identify with and want. So if the torch represents freedom, enlightenment, knowledge, they're putting it on the American Oil Company logo so that when you go and give money, overinflated amounts of money, to buy the fuel that we quote unquote need because we haven't made anti-gravitic propulsion technology because we can't give that to the earthly slaves. They have to have their internal combustion engine and use the Earth's lifeblood that we vampirize out of the earth on a daily basis. You know, and we're all guilty of it, you know, because there's no other alternative in this society if you want to travel anywhere. And, you know, they want to put the symbol of knowledge, enlightenment, wisdom, and freedom on that logo and sell you that in proxy. What they know we don't really have collectively. That's how this works. It's using the archetype for what the purpose they want to use it for. Now, something that I do see as more dark symbolism than anything else, I'm not saying that the owl always represents something that's bad or evil. It generally just represents wisdom, knowledge, intelligence, wisdom, insight, but also secrecy, predation, night, and darkness, because the owl is a predatory bird. It's a flesh-eating bird that can see its prey from a higher perspective in a state of darkness because of its superior night vision, where its prey does not have that same capability and cannot see it coming for it. That's why it's loved by dark occultism, by dark occultists of all kind. They identify with this symbol because they look at themselves as the predator class that can see its prey, that knows everything about its prey. They see it from a higher perspective, where its prey is on the ground, very low, at a lower level of consciousness, and they're in a position to very easily take advantage of that differential in knowledge. Hence, they consider themselves the wise, ancient, predatory bird. And that's why they use that symbol at meeting grounds like Bohemian Grove. A ritual of it depicted there, and one of their main sigils with the Bohemian Club owl with a belt around it representing the Ouroboros with the phrase, "Weaving spiders come not here." So they're trying to convince people they're not there to do any work. They're not there to actually get together and conspire. They're there for a simple vacation where they're just going to blow off steam and perform some homosexual acts with, paid homosexual prostitutes that they bring in there. But a big point of contention in some occult research is the owl at the Bohemian Grove. Does it represent Moloch, which is a Canaanite deity from the Levant area and ancient Phoenicia Canaan, which was seen as a bull in that tradition because he represented Baal, an older Phoenician god, Bel or Bil, which then morphed into the Canaanite god Baal or Baal, was often sacrificed, had children sacrificed to it. These burners that they actually created, these huge immolation pits, they would actually, during what was called the season of sacrifice, a 40-day period at the beginning of spring to the midpoint of spring, to give homage and sacrifice to their sun god, Bel or Bil or Baal, they would take the purest thing in their society, which was newborn children, and offer some of them to this god, the solar god, because they believed that the life force energy was in the blood, and the blood had to be offered to the god of the sun in order to ensure a bountiful harvest and the growth of crops, because that's how they looked at the cycle of life force energy, through the blood, through the sun, through the earth, through the growing of crops in the springtime, and then being harvested in the summer toward the fall so that they would be able to survive the season of death, the winter. The concept of the immolation rites of Canaan, of the Canaanite tradition, these rituals were actually known as Molochs, M-O-L-O-C-H. Okay? The Moloch was the ritual. The god that they were sacrificing to was Molech, M-O-L-E-C-H. This became tied with some symbolism of the owl in that region, particularly because this region was close to the Sumerian region, and some of the belief systems of Sumer promulgated to that region, and the owl was a big symbol of goddess tradition and solar cult tradition in the Sumerian and Akkadian regions. So these concepts of the bull god and the owl god as being solar deities kind of crossed over with each other. And I would say that the Bohemian Grove owl does correspond to Baal. It does correspond to the sun god that they worship as part of this cult of the dark sun that I've been talking about. And they certainly perform a sacrifice ritual to that owl. It's called the cremation of care. They're sacrificing care to the god because they don't want that generative principle operating in humanity. So what do? In effigy, allegedly, they burn a child. It's a male child. And what is the name of that male child in the ceremony, the dark occult ceremony known as the cremation of care? They call the male child dull care. It's a mockery ritual. It's a total mockery ritual. They're saying humanity's care is dull. They can't defeat us. We're burning up their dull care on a yearly basis. And it's cake work. You know, it's a piece of cake for us to do because they don't see us. You know, they don't see what we're about here, what we're really gathered to focus upon. I would say that's just the mock ritual that goes on out in front of the other lower level members to basically focus their energy. I would say, as in all ancient priest class rituals, there was always a real ritual going on behind some fake ritual that was performed up front. But then in what was known as the Holy of Holies through the veil somewhere, probably deeper into the Californian groves there's probably a real sacrifice ritual that takes place where they're channeling all of that energy that, is being focused on this proxy ritual and, using it for their benefit in the real ritual. The cremation of care, I mean, it's right out in people's face. More so, it's out in our face in architectural ways, where in the city where I'm from, on the left there is Commerce Square, one of the banking centers of Philadelphia. So clearly, two owls standing side by side with their wings down at their side. I don't know how anybody can deny that those buildings are built deliberately to look like owls. What other building do you see with diamonds at the tops looking like ears anywhere in the world? But don't worry about it. The bankers, they have nothing to do with the dark occult. They have no religion. It's all just secular humanism all the way, and they're trying to fight those bubbles that come up constantly. They want to make it work for us. Have our interest at heart. This is the Frost Bank building. Again, seems like the financial, quote-unquote, elitist trash really like the owl symbolism in their buildings. This one, even at night, is even more pronounced with the eyes, lighting up very clearly. This is the Capitol building. And this is from, again, Google Earth. And if you just outline the street system directly around the Capitol building, it is an owl with its arms outstretched, perched on top with its tail coming down from the legs. If you extended this image below, if you look at it on Google Maps, it's a 13-street pyramid. It's a 13-level pyramid, just like the pyramid on the back of the dollar bill. 13 levels with the owl perched on top of it, surrounding in its belly, symbolically, the Capitol building. Again, the dark occult surrounding the place where, supposedly the the betters of our society are convening to basically direct the rest of our lives, you know? And there are people who will debate this and they'll insist, oh, this is just some kind of coincidence. Yeah, it's a strange symbol of a huge crested owl with huge ears and wings outstretched, sitting on top of a pyramid over the Capitol building of the United States. Very coincidental. Actually, here is the image from pulled back some. You could see the Capitol building there. You could see the symbol of the owl with the ears and the tail, and its wings are outstretched. And then this is the 13-level pyramid that it sits atop right there. I've done work in my podcast series to actually break down a lot of the geomancy that's embedded in the street system of Washington, D.C. I probably even myself have missed a lot of it because there's so much embedded in it. But this is a map of pretty much the whole D.C. district here. And this is all of the symbolism that's contained in there. You have the inverted pentagram pointing to the White House. You have the sacred feminine egg. You have the phallic symbol, the penis symbol, with a tipped by the huge phallic symbol, the Washington Monument, the pentagonal symbolism with the Pentagon, the owl with the compasses and square surrounding it atop the 13-level pyramid. You have the seal of Solomon, the sun and the moon, the upward pointing triangle and the downward pointing triangle, the chalice and blade intertwined. Another huge inverted pyramid, which is approximately 30 levels, 30 streets. And then over top of that, you have the illuminated torch that illuminated torch, the road that forms that torch goes around a baseball stadium, which looks like the eye in the middle of the torch. And that's the easternmost position of the city. This is facing east. So there's, starting, it's really like a symbol starting with the will center, going up. This is supposed to be the heart center, then the illumination, the mind center facing east. That's how they say it. They see themselves as those who have the light. And they're throwing it right in our face, and people can't see it. Pine cone symbolism, another very popular piece of symbolism for people who consider themselves, quote, in the know, that they consider that they are spiritually aware and enlightened, they have the knowledge, they are awoken, they have wisdom, and they have transformed themselves spiritually. In many cases, it's the exact opposite. The pine cone symbolism comes after the pineal gland, which is at the center of the head. It's right here, circled in red. It's considered in the midbrain or the limbic system of the brain. It regulates, this gland regulates a lot of different functions within the individual related to perception, emotion, etc. And the gland looks like a little pine cone. It has a lot of blood flow that goes through it, and it's very much attacked as something that they seem not to want to develop or function properly. So a lot of the food, things in water are very much attacked to target this part of the central nervous system. The pine cone literally looks like a little pineal gland. Okay, the pineal gland looks like a little pine cone, I should say. This is called the court of the pine cone, and it is at the Vatican. That's where that pine cone is at. It is surrounded by two peacocks. Peacocks are another big symbol in alchemy. They represent alchemical transformation. Again, the pine cone represents awakening, resurrection, or transmutation, spiritual transmutation. Now, below it, there is a black, empty sarcophagus right down there below on the left-hand side. As you go up these steps in the court of the pine cone to the other side of it, from this image perspective, that's what you will see. And behind it, there is an empty sarcophagus. Now, they're basically throwing this symbolism right in your face. We are the resurrected ones. We are the ones who have come out of darkness and into light. We have the knowledge. We understand how the awakening process works. We understand how this activity of the brain that people don't even understand and whose functions are essentially shut down due to the horrible nutrition and all kinds of pollutants in their food and water. We know how that works. You know, and we have done that transformation to ourselves, but that's not for you. You know, we're going to sequester that and keep it to ourselves and keep it here. And they never mention this. You'll never hear about this by the Vatican. But just go on Google Images, and you know, you'll see tons of images of it. Type Court of the Pine Cone. You have a lot of tourist images that just take pictures of it. Of course, here you see the Pope in his astrotheological regalia here, holding the cross, but at the base of it is the pine cone right there in his hand. I circle it right there. In symbolic iconography throughout the ancient world, the pine cone is revered. It's always a symbol of the transformation of a god. Often the god is giving that spiritual essence or knowledge to humanity. Here you see it in the Akkadian tradition of one of their gods, a clearly non-human looking entity. Here it is in the Babylonian tradition. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me go back one. Here it is in Egyptian symbology in a caduceus form. And of course, it was the hairstyle of the Buddha, who was considered a symbol, a very symbol of resurrection and awakening. And you see in many different Buddhic images the hairstyle that he is wearing reflective of the pine cone. Let's look at the symbolism of the fasces. Fasces is an ancient Roman symbol that was an axe, and it was bound up and surrounded by a bundle of rods. This represented total control, centralized authority. The Roman Empire was represented by the axe, and then its satellite states were considered the rods, all held together by the authority of Rome, the bundle of staves. It represented total control, total domination, strength, combined power, and authority. I see this as a highly negative symbol, a symbol of oppression. So then the question is, what is it doing in so much government symbolism? What's it doing in secret society or fraternal order symbolism? On the back of the U.S. dime, on state seals, in the Senate chambers of the United States government itself, where the Speaker of the House sits. At the Lincoln Memorial, Lincoln, on the sides of his, quote, throne as the king enshrined in that temple, is holding two fasces in his hands. It's on German postage stamp as a symbol of fascism on the left-hand side there. You know, they're basically outright telling you who they are. They're telling you what their agenda is wordlessly. Never in words, always wordlessly. And the rationale here in their religious notion goes something like this. If we tell them in any language, regardless of how obscure the language is, even if they don't understand the language, somehow that gives us carte blanche license to do what we want, because their refusal to say no is tacit approval, is silent, tacit approval. And they look at it like they're not karmically responsible if they say, hey, I'm going to punch you in the face, but I'm going to draw a really obscure figure of me punching you in the face, such that you'll look at it and not really know it's me punching you in the face. I can hand that to you, and then tomorrow I could punch you really hard in the face, and somehow I'm not karmically responsible for that action because I told you I was going to do it and you didn't say no. That's how their twisted, warped logic works. Yet that's their belief system. Once again, I'm not saying you have to think that it really works like that, because I don't think it really works like that either. I'm just telling you that's how they think it does. That's their religious belief. People act on their religious belief. They think if we tell you something and then you don't say no, regardless of whether we told you in an obscure language, we have the right to do it because you didn't say no. You know, so that's their religion. And it's all illegitimate. I'm not telling you that's legitimate. I'm not saying it really does excuse their karmic consequence. I'm saying that's what they believe. And they're willing to act upon it. Let's look at some checkerboard floor symbolism. The symbol of the checkered floor in the Freemasonic tradition, again, represented ignorance, unconsciousness, earthbound identification, immorality, and ultimately slavery if we stay there. Well, let's see how this symbolism is used. Again, I would suggest this symbolism is always used dark occultically. It's used here in the Fraternal Order of Police's emblem, their sigil, in the middle with the pillars. And I see this as a very negative arrangement of those pillars, because in the Masonic tradition, the true arrangement of those pillars would be in an upright position with the pillar of unity raised above the pillars of duality. So now they're raising the dual pillars over the pillar of unity, which is underneath the checkerboard floor. I see this as raising duality, above unity consciousness. And they're shaking hands on it and saying, we're in the know, the symbol of the eye. I broke this all down in my occult mockery of police and military personnel presentation that I gave at the first Free Your Mind conference. One of the ways they really ritualistically mock these children who don't understand what they're being told at all, and who just, say, hey, give me a paycheck, I'll do whatever you tell me to do. I have no conscience, I have no morality. I take a paycheck to take actions where I don't give a damn whether they're right or wrong. That's what all police are. 100%, all, every one, bar none. Every single one in the history of the world. People won't come out and just say something as simple as that, as factually flat out as that, because they're too afraid they're going to offend somebody's delicate sensibilities. I don't care whose family member's a cop or knows somebody who's a cop. Every single one of them are involved in something that's immoral. Because if you take a paycheck to perform an action and you're not concerned whether that action is right or wrong, whether you actually have a right to take it, but you do it because you say it's your job, that's the definition of immorality. And what they do with idiots like this is they wrap the checkerboard floor around their head, because they're wordlessly telling them, you are a know-nothing. Around your brain, we are wrapping the symbol that means ignorance and slavery. And the lack of understanding of the difference between right and wrong, we're putting it around your brain like a headband, And these people think this is some kind of a badge of honor, when they're basically wordlessly being totally trashed and mocked by the people who designed this system of iconography and symbolism. Just as a brief aside here to the checkerboard floor symbolism, the people who think that there's no connection between police, between, occult orders and fraternal orders like Freemasonry, and control systems like police of all places, all geographic regions and states. It's everywhere. And this is just a tiny, tiny little sample. We can go on, we could have 20 of these screens and you still wouldn't have all the Masonically affiliated police lodges and orders. And, I see this as nothing but dark masonry. How many of these lodges are teaching police morality? How many of these lodges do you think are actually trying to teach these police any kind of a system of... First of all, if you taught a police true morality, they wouldn't be a cop anymore. Nobody who's in a state of true morality could do that job, period. Nobody ever has. Ever. I don't care who it offends. I've almost gotten in fights with some of my friends for saying it. Can't be done. The two are antitheses of each other. Order followers, by definition, are performing an action without first engaging and ensuring for themselves that they know that that action is within the bounds of morality, and they know that they are not harming anybody by taking it, or they're not doing something that they have no right to do by taking that action. By definition, an order follower simply follows the order, or they wouldn't be an order follower. So by definition, an order follower cannot be a moral being. Period. Cannot. It's like saying, I can melt this ice cube and still have an ice cube. No, you can't. That's not the definition of it. Once you melt it, it's water. It's not an ice cube anymore. So that's what people who try to say order followers can be moral people think. That's their twisted logic. And by the way, this is what's going to be central, hammering, relentless focus of my work in coming weeks and years. I'm going to mercilessly hammer on the whole order-following dynamic. Okay? I mean, you're not going to hear the end of this. I'm going to build whole presentations on nothing but the dynamic of what order following actually is. And try to make it so simple that a 2-year-old could understand it. Okay? So the next piece of symbolism is the hypercube. I think this is the last piece of symbolism. How are we doing on time? I think I'm way ahead in this section. Oh, great. I'm right on time then. Beautiful. Okay. So right now it's 4:30? Yes. Perfect. Okay, the hypercube is depicted here by this really cool animation. I finally found a really good animation of the hypercube that explains the concept of the cube inside the cube moving endlessly through itself. Thus, in dark occultism in particular, the hypercube represents an eternal prison. It's a very, very concealed and high-level symbol in dark occultism. Many times this will not ever be shown or talked about with a lower-level initiate in the occult. All right, so we're talking about high-level dark occult symbolism now. The hypercube's meanings or interpretation are total control, total domination, entrapment, lockdown, no escape, permanent imprisonment, I really should have wrote on here, and permanent slavery. No way out. The mind is taken. The soul is taken. It's gone. Okay? And it's in the trap. All right? So I hope people can really understand how this is a perfect symbol of that, because it's like the earthly contained within the earthly, the symbol of the cube or the square, and it's full four-dimensional perspective. That's what the hypercube is. They call this the extruded cube. It's a cube rotated into all other dimensions so that it becomes what is considered a 4D object. You actually have many cubes there rotating amongst each other. Okay? And again, what it represents is dimensionality or densities. If you look at the dot as having no dimension, as just a single point in space-time, it has no depth, width, height, anything. That would be 0D. If we extrude that, if we pull that through one dimension, that becomes a one-dimensional object or a line. If we then extrude the 1D object, it can become a plane. And now we have a two-dimensional object, a plane, a square, etc. Then if we take that and we extrude the square, we have a square here, and we extrude that through another dimension, we get a three-dimensional object or a cube. Now, what if we were to take the cube and extrude it and pull it through another dimension of space, which is very difficult for our three-dimensional brains to even extrapolate? What it would actually somewhat look like visually is the hypercube, or what's known as the tesseract in mathematics. That is a four-dimensional cube, a 4D space cube. Now, in one of its 2D projections, if we rotated this in a certain way, this cube, we would get this two-dimensional projection of the hypercube. And you see that the 2D projection of the hypercube is outlined by an octagon. The outside edge of the 2D hypercube projection in this orientation is the hypercube. So in dark occultism, whenever you see the octagon or you see the 8-pointed star, the two squares laying at a 90-degree angle over top of each other, almost invariably you're talking about the hypercube, and it's just a two-dimensional projection or variant of the hypercube. And I'll show you what I mean by this. Okay, the first thing is the hypercube in its octagonal projection is used by the police, particularly here in America. Cops wear this really strange 8-cornered hat. It's an octagonal hat, and it's black. And they're putting this once again on their heads. See, the dark occultists who design this stuff and who understand what it means symbolically and understand what it projects energetically always target the brain. You know, they're not taking body shots, they're taking head shots. Okay? So they put this symbolism on the head of the person who's doing these jobs. So here's the eight-cornered hat from overhead. It's clearly an octagonal shape. The stop sign put on every American street corner, the red octagon. It's a symbol of the hypercube. The word stop carries a vibratory energy. You know, first of all, at 90% or more of the places where a stop sign is embedded, you don't need a stop sign. First person who gets there goes. When another person, if they get there, it's 1 and 1, you know? That's how you basically do it in any street system in any major city anyway. I always fail to understand the logic of people who can't get that concept of the 1 and 1 of trying to, you know, I see them all the time in South Philadelphia, unfortunately. Usually they're from out of town though, but, you know, this symbolism is rich in police. This is where they use it the most. Now, when you look at what the hypercube symbolism means, again, it means total domination, total control, enslavement, entrapment. We're not talking about these people being in control or in charge. We're talking about them being in the prison, being in the trap. They're the ones who are being ruled by the symbolism. You know, they think they're the people who are in control, who are making decisions, who are controlling other people. These are the perfect house slaves who are ruled by the real dark occult masters who are putting this satanic symbolism all over their bodies. And they don't even know it because they're so stupid. Now, literally, I mean, look, I'm just going to say it like that, folks. I don't care who gets offended in the room. I don't care who gets offended out there in internet land. You know, these people are stupid. They haven't seen the inside of a book since they were like 5 years old. You know, they don't read. These are people who don't read, period. I'm not going to be ruled by people who don't read, not in this lifetime. You'll take me out of this life, but I'm not going to be ruled by it. And, you know, secondly, even if they did have some book knowledge, there's still no common sense there. It may be all intellect. Doesn't make a difference. If it's not balanced by heart knowledge, it's not real intelligence. If it's not balanced by the knowledge of common sense of the difference between right and wrong behavior, it's not real intelligence. It's only intellect, which, you know, that will get you destruction every time when it's not balanced with the sacred feminine. So, you know, here's the Sussex Police emblem. 1 square, 2 squares. Again, that's another projection of the octagon or the hypercube, because look at the enclosed space. The enclosed space is the octagon. Okay? So 2 squares overlapping each other, always in occult symbolism, means total control. We control it all, including the mind. There's no escape. Okay? The hypercube is the enclosed space. And where is it? On the head, once again. As the badge on the third, you know, the third eye location, or actually above that, on the crown. And, you know, let's combine that with the checkerboard floor of the house, why don't we? You know, we have a nice 1-2 punch there to mock our house slave. You know, and these people don't even care about themselves enough to know that they're house slaves. Hey, half the time you can't offend somebody with that phrase because they're so stupid they don't even understand the historical connotation of what a house slave meant. That's really sad. That you can't look them in the face, call them a house slave, and have them get offended. They're not intelligent enough to be offended by that phrase. You know, that's about as sad as it gets. I know I'm hitting it a little bit hard with the harshness, but, you know, hey, I'm going to call it like it really is. So, you know, here's some more hypercube symbolism on the so-called Medal of Valor. You know, you have so much valor for following orders. There it is, the double square with the inverted pentagram, with the goddess in the middle of the inverted pentagram. And in a moment, I'm going to show you the goddess in the middle of the octagon and the double square. Right here. Not too far from here. You know, Special Forces Army. Oh, I'm sorry. The very badge itself was surrounded by the octagonal shape. Oh, and then we have don't forget the trapezoid around it, which represents the truncated pyramid without the light. You know, could it get any more satanic? I don't know, you know. I was a priest in the Church of Satan, and I'm telling you, that's more satanic than any emblem I ever wore. You know? Around Fort Knox, enclosing the gold, symbolically the alchemical gold. You know, it's the gold bars that are no longer there, but, you know, we're going to enclose the whole place in the octagon. Again, it represents security, lockdown, etc. The octagon is the fighting ring of, you know, extreme fighting, where, you know, the maximum damage to the human brain happens. Hey, you know, say what you will about the martial arts, full contact stuff that can actually have damage to the brain, I feel is like masculine posturing. I understand it's a competition of force, but, you know, at some point, you know, if aggression comes my way, I'm not about trying to prove I'm the better fighter, you know. At that point, if it's about your freedom and your life, it's about taking the other person out. That's it. And it's not about proving anything to anybody, you know. It's about, at that point, am I the better shot than you? You know, so it's used in security systems constantly. It's probably the main or only shape that's ever used in security systems anymore, because you know, they use that archetypal symbol of the octagon or hypercube to represent that total lockdown. Now, very close to here in Manchester, just in Hartford, this is the Hartford City Hall. It's a huge phallic symbol. Underneath that huge phallic dome in this temple, and I'm telling you, it is an elaborate, ornate temple, this place, if you've never been to it. Art took Barb and I there yesterday for a little tour, and the architecture is impressive. Okay, it's beautiful. But when you step into it, you realize you're in a satanic temple. You know, because here they have the goddess right underneath that huge phallic symbol of masculine energy. She's encased in that phallic symbol and the energy that's within it, representing masculine domination, the law of man. And what do we have down at the bottom there, folks? The double square surrounding the goddess's platform. Yep. There it is, taken from above. You have the sun and the moon encompassed in her base there, and she's standing on that pedestal, and the double square surrounding her. I couldn't obviously reach out far enough to get it directly overhead, so it's slightly skewed, but you can clearly see the two squares. And then this is, if you go right to her feet and you point your camera up, you're looking at the dome. Look at the shape of the dome, the octagon, right above her head. I'll take it back so you can see that. There's the double square. Right above the goddess's head as you're standing at her feet in this temple that is the main, the main iconography from the outside is a huge phallic dome. Then that is the underneath side. That is the top of that phallic dome. She's standing right underneath it. And if you actually look up from the bottom at her feet, it's an octagon right above her head. So she's surrounded by the octagon bottom and top. But there's nothing to that. It's just, it all just worked out that way because of the architecture. No, they didn't plan any of the architecture for this building or hire some of the best, stonemasons and stoneworkers probably in this whole region of the country. It's all just accidental. They happened to put the goddess there. They happened to put the double square around her. They happened to put her inside of a big phallic symbol. They happened to put the octagon directly over her head. All just happened that way. That's called coincidence theory at its finest. But hey, there's some people, these people will come out and say, we're your owners, we accept the devil as our God, and we're going to kill you now. And they'll still say, I don't believe it. That's how broken their brains are. That's where we're at. That's the level of denial that we're at. Because when a species becomes so sick, they start to go into the level of denial. I'm not sick and dying. I'm not being eaten by evil entities. No, that's not happening to me. That happens on other worlds. It doesn't happen here. All right, I'm going to wrap up this section. How are we doing on time? 17 minutes left? All right, I'm going to start this section then. And what we get through, we get through. If not, I'll pick it up on the other side. I want to go through some of the symbolism of intelligence agencies. Specifically one intelligence agency, which I'll get to in a moment. But I want to talk about the fact first that the modern intelligence apparatus in any given state or government is the highest level of the dark occult operating in that society. You want to know who the real dark occultists, the real sorcerers, the real dark wizards, the real dark workers are? Find the intelligence organizations within a given state, and you have the highest level dark occultists. All right? And because at some level, and I don't care how unpopular this makes me, I don't care how much people want to say, oh, it can't be so, I don't care how much you want to say what I'm about to say discredits my other work, eventually these agencies begin working with entities and consciousnesses that are not actually human. Okay, and that's controversial, and you could say whatever you want about that statement. But I'm telling you, you'll see it in these images. All right? So, the main intelligence agency whose symbolism I'm going to break down in this section, out of all the ones I could have chosen from, is this one right here, second from the left at the bottom, the National Reconnaissance Organization. I'm sorry, the National Reconnaissance Office, the NRO. This is their seal, the National Reconnaissance Office. And you see it has the Earth, and it's, has an orbital line with a ball going around it representing ostensibly a satellite. But what I want to show people here is some of the symbolism that is so drastically, blatantly, undoubtedly, in your face, dark occult symbolism that I don't know after showing these images to somebody, if you could say, people who have sick, twisted religious belief systems aren't involved at some of the highest levels of intelligence agencies and government. I don't know what to tell anybody, Like I said, it's like at that point, wrap it up. That person doesn't want to know. They want to remain ignorant, and they want to think that the world is something that it is not, because they're more comfortable with a lie than they are with the truth. So let's look at who the NRO actually is. They're basically responsible for all of the reconnaissance satellites that go into orbit, spy satellites essentially. And they are the intelligence agency operating in the United States that has the least amount of employees working for them, yet the biggest budget in monies allocated to their budget, okay? Now, in this chart, okay, so the number of people working for the organization is the left-hand axis. It says total civilian and military personnel for the year 1996. And then this is the amount of money that was spent on that organization in that year, in that 1 year alone, $6 billion, over $6 billion for the NRO. Whereas they have less than 10,000 people working for them. All these other organizations have much more people working for them. Great, thank you. 15 minutes. So, it says here as a caveat, this note, the National Reconnaissance Office, NRO, directly funds a small number of personnel, but indirectly funds tens of thousands of contractor personnel. That means they're not listed on their official budget, but yet they fund private entities. They fund people in the private sector to do some of the analysis work that they perform. Most of the time, these are known as SAPs, or Special Access Projects. Look up the term. Okay? This is how they're keeping the things that they do completely unaccountable, according to the regular ways and means of Congress. They're keeping it out of that oversight by putting it in the private sector under SAP, Special Access Projects. That's why they're making this caveat, well, there's less than 1,000 probably official employees, but they do fund tens of thousands of contractor personnel in the private sector. All right, that's just a caveat I wanted to note there. I'm going to actually wrap it up right here on this slide, because on the other side of the dinner break, what I want to do is we'll break a little bit early, so we'll be back here at 6 o'clock for the wrap-up. I'm going to break down some of the National Reconnaissance Office dark occult symbolism, and then I'm going to give a case study in light occult symbolism and very powerful spiritual positive occult symbolism in the breaking down of the major arcana of the tarot deck. So ladies and gentlemen, meet back here at 6 p.m. Thank you.